Hi, everybody. Will Alexander from Will Alexander's Dog Show Tips. Today on the interview chair, we have none other than Mr. Shawn Nichols. I've been friends with Shawn for a very, very long time. So sit back and enjoy an afternoon with Shawn.
Here.
All right. Hi, everybody. We're here with the interview chair, and our guest today is Mr. Shawn Nichols. Known Shawn a very long time. First of all, I want to say congratulations, Shawn, on your assignment at PCA. That's an incredible assignment. You should be very proud of yourself. What an
Thank
honor.
you. Thank you very much.
How are you, Shawn?
I'm good. And you?
I'm good. Staying busy. How's the pandemic treating you out there?
You want to know, it's trying to find new ways to exist and kind of keep your head above the water. So, I mean, it's no more challenging for me than it is for anyone else. So it's a little bit awkward because I moved away from my family a couple of years ago, but I'm lucky because about a year and a half ago, Danny Augustus moved. So at least I have a roommate. It couldn't have been, I haven't had a roommate for a long time, but it couldn't have happened at a better time.
Oh, perfect. I'm sure you guys are good company. Probably pretty funny sometimes.
It has its moments.
All right, let's start. Tell me how old you were and how you got involved in the sport of dogs, Shawn, please.
I started in 1982. I was 12. Originally, I'd started in horses, and financially, my parents were separated. There wasn't a lot of extra money. So I actually, when I was 12, had the largest hand-delivered paper route in Canada. And
Is that true?
it is true. I started delivering the paper when I was 10, and I had a very small paper route on the edge of the community that we lived in, and it was kind of like a prospering community and growing. So I was on the edge of it. So as it grew, my paper route grew and grew and grew. And I believe when I finished delivering the paper, I was 15 years old, and I think it was actually divided into 6 separate routes.
Wow.
So, and they kept trying to take away from me, but I was like a firm believer. I built the business; it's mine. You can't have it. So, and but and it was funny because when you delivered the Vancouver Sun, I mean on a Saturday, the paper was like this thick. So it would take me like literally hours. The biggest horror story ever is if I was ever sick and my parents had to do my papers, it was always a nightmare. But when you deliver the paper, it's almost like another job. You get seniority. So as a kid, I was probably making $600-700 a month delivering the paper.
That's pretty cool.
But all of my money was going to pay for my horse, and it wasn't a whole lot of fun when I would come home from school, deliver the paper from 3 to 6:30, and I would never see my horse. So I decided that I would sell my horse. Yeah, so anyway, I sold my horse, and there was a local breeder in the area that I lived that bred apricot toys and minis, and I basically started spending a lot of time at their kennel and going, and he was a retired iron worker for CP Rail, and she was quite elderly. And anyway, I used to go, and then eventually I started going to shows with him. And
what were their names?
Their name, Vi and Joe Bates. So their big claim to fame was that they had one champion that Susan Hillman finished for them, and I think that picture kind of was like the shrine of their house.
That's great.
It was funny. Many years later, after I had worked for Timmy and Mark Shanoff, I always used to keep it in contact with this old guy, and I can remember he said to me, maybe one day you'll be good enough to show one of my dogs.
Did you ever show one of his dogs?
No, by the time I moved back to Canada at the end of 95, he had passed away. So
No, that's a shame.
yeah. So anyway, I used to just go and I was kind of like his intel. I would go to the dog shows and, I would go talk to people like Dana, and Dana would say, "Oh, I use these type of rubber bands." And then he would go get those rubber bands. So it was quite humorous. But he was a good old guy, and he used to be very invested in reading Poodle Review and Poodle Variety and gaining as much knowledge, and he would spare no expense to advance his breeding program as he saw it.
Sure, yeah. I used to love reading Poodle Variety and all those magazines too. So
But I think back then, Poodle Review was such a great resource because Poodle Variety, I think, it was a little bit more tactile. It was like it had pretty pictures and everything. But I think back then, when Del Doll and Mackie Irick had Poodle Review, I think the guts of it were a lot more about breeders and genetics and issues. So I think it was a really good resource for new people.
yeah, for sure. So where did you go from there? You started attending shows with your first toy poodle person.
So the very first person I ever worked for was Mark and Sally George.
Oh, okay.
So back as you know,
So you worked in the States before you worked in Canada.
I only ever worked in Canada for 1 year. I was an assistant for almost 10 years, and I think I worked for 1 year for Carol.
Okay.
When she was showing the Averina Anastasia bitch, I worked for her in 1988. But every other person that I worked for was American.
Oh, okay.
But it was funny because back then it was very different. It was, when as when we were going to go work for the handler and so forth, we didn't have cell phones and we didn't have email. So you actually had to send a letter and formally introduce yourself. And I can remember back then, Ray Splon had kind of been anointed
I
as
heard that name in ages. Holy.
Oh no, wait, he was anointed the person that would kind of place young juniors with handlers for the summer. So anyway, he put me in contact with Mark, George, and Sally Critchlow, who were a new item at the time. And I got on a train from Seattle and took the train from Seattle to San Francisco and worked for them for the summer. And then kind of after that, I got the bite for dog shows, and I did a stupid thing, and I quit school and I went and worked for Dana Plunky, and I worked for him until when he retired at the end of his career.
Well, that would have been fun working for Dana.
Yeah, still we're very close to this day. That was 1985, so it was a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And then after Dana retired, it was funny because, again, I was talking about how we had to communicate via mail, and I basically sent a letter to Mark Shanoff and to Shelley Green. Well, they must have got the letters the same day because they literally phoned within 15 minutes of each other. So Mark called first, clearly. So I went to go work for Mark, and that was kind of I would work for Mark. I would get sick of Mark. I would go work for Timmy. I would get sick of Timmy. I'd go back to Mark. And I went back and forth several times until Mark got sick at the beginning of 1990. And then I kind of stayed with Mark right through to that when he passed away. And then I stayed on a little bit longer. And then basically at the end of 95, I returned to Canada.
Okay, before we carry on, give us a little insight on Mark, just because you had more insight than most people, and a lot of the new people, if they haven't heard of him, they barely heard of him, and I think he was a great influence on poodles of that era for sure. So could you just give them just a quick insight on Mark for me?
You want to know? Mark was. I would say the the Picasso of poodle groomers. And it's funny. I think when you have someone like Mark, and brilliance and insanity kind of walk a very fine line.
That's true.
And Mark's ability to base, he was like the Coco Chanel of poodle groomers, because not every woman fits the same black dress.
Right.
And I think Mark was more aware of that than anyone. And his trims were so customizable to what he had in front of him. And I think he really was before his time. Unfortunately, sometimes his emotions and reactions to situations got the best of him. But again, I think he was so invested in Mark never believed in a half full bucket. It was a half empty bucket. Mark, every single top knot got done every day. We had 80 dogs in hair. Every dog got bathed every single week. His attention to detail and everything I think I know about animal husbandry today, I think I learned from him. He was, and you were set up at dog shows near us. We were always the first ones in the building, the last ones out. Our specials got washed every single day. And I think I just kind of learned that whole process. And, even the way I approach, trimming today, I'll do, their feet on Monday, I'll do their front legs on Tuesday, I'll do their face on Wednesday, I'll clip their ass ends the morning of, because again, it's very customizable. And it was interesting. I was just sitting with someone recently and we were trimming, and I don't trim often. And this person said, I didn't know you could trim. And I'm like, well, how do you think I could be here for 40 years and not trim? I said, don't ever tell anyone or I'll kill you, because I hate it. Because the problem is for me, what Raymond could do in 2 hours takes me 8.
Yes.
My end result will last for 3 months, because the way I trim and everything, it holds a shape for a long time, but I'm just not fast at it. But when everything has a spot. And I think a lot of people, when they're putting dogs into pattern, especially today, it's the same little black dress that they're putting on every dog. And it's, some have too much loin and you need to customize the trim. Some need bigger rosettes, smaller rosettes. You know what I mean? Like and all of that I would have never learned if I didn't learn from Mark, because it was just so specific to every dog.
That's a great analogy, the little black dress, because it's perfect for each dog.
Well, and it's just, and again, I think it's the difference between, he was a genius, and there are people out there that do flawless work, but they can grow beautiful, wonderful hair in wonderful condition and weight, and they're Maxine worthy, but they're, when you look at them, it's the same trim that they formulate for every single dog. It's like, I use the last rib as my guideline for this, and a lot of times when you do that, I think what I see a lot of time, especially now when I judge, is you end up with trims that are broken into 2 pieces. So, and then it's bringing your eye to the wrong spot.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I thought I loved watching that back then, watching him work. I thought he was totally amazing. There was no question he was a genius of his craft.
It's like, he was just, I hold people like him and Maripi and, Gus Gomez, people that were so passionate about one thing and they did it so exceedingly well. And it's, I don't know that we see that as much now as, our generation. And I can say that because we're, very similar in age. Things have changed quite a bit. And I think it certainly has changed the way young people look at going into being a handler as a profession. And you would, if you hadn't worked for Gary McDonald and, had all of the experiences that you had, and same with me, or even Allison. You put in back then. If you didn't put in 5 years with a professional handler, you weren't considered valid.
Right.
So, and that's just changed so much. And I said to someone recently, I sent a puppy to this person, and I said, I don't care how many beautiful ribbons you win. That is not my agenda. But if my dog is in distress, do you know how to deal with the situation? So I want to know that my dog has clean paper, clean bed, clean water, and is fed properly, because animal husbandry to me is the most important part of what we do. Big fancy ribbons is just the icing on the cake.
Well, exactly. All right. So thank you. Carry on from Mark then. You worked for Mark, and Mark ultimately passed away and untimely, and was horrible, and big crush on the sport. So what happened from there?
I took a break from the end of 1995 to 1999. And then at the beginning of 99, I moved to Calgary. And basically, very shortly after I moved to Calgary, Raymond Urich and I started, dating, and we showed dogs together professionally, and we were together for 11 years. So, and we kind of had, I don't think our approach to handling was never anyone else's approach. Like I know judges have said what they admired about us is that every dog that I took into the ring, and we showed a lot of hair, the commitment and responsibility to presenting that dog was, I treated my class dogs like they were special dogs.
Mm-hmm.
They got like my toy poodles, my miniature poodles, my Shih Tzus. I mean, I finished like, over 30 Shih Tzus. They got bathed, every other day. They got ironed every day. Class dogs got, baths, and they had, puffs and ears. So Ray and our approach to class dogs was always like specials dogs. And the problem with that is they would finish fairly quickly. So, and we were never in a situation, because we had a very small setup. We could never show like 30 or 40 dogs. So, Ray and I always had to maintain kind of careers while we were showing dogs. So it was a little bit more challenging. I don't think I've ever had, or Ray as well, we've never had the perfect setup to do it as a primary living. And I don't think in the West, I think it's a much bigger challenge, because I don't think people are looking for you to condition their dogs. They just want to drop them off on Friday and pick them up Sunday night, so they don't have to pay $10 on board.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Yeah. But yeah, I remember what we watched you guys from the East watching, but you both were very good. Ray worked for me for quite a while, and then the two of you made a great team, condition and handling wise. Your dogs always looked 100%. So
Well, and you want to know, and we were Ray and I were we're still very, very close and very good friends. Ray was good at things that I wasn't good at, and vice versa. We were, between the two of us, Ray and I separated 3 times before we actually separated. And I can remember every time that, we would separate back then again, Bill Taylor would send a note in the mail and would be like, now, do I need to get on a plane and come and bang your boys' heads together? And it was, and I can remember one time, and I don't know if a lot of people would know this, I was in Montreal and I had lunch with Bill, and every time you would get together with Bill for lunch or dinner, it was always a very long event. You were in for at least 8 hours. And I can remember him telling me a story, and he said, he says, do you really think a life with Nigel was easy? And he said 54 years. He said, and I can assure you there was never an easy day. And he said, and at this point of time, Nigel had passed away for a couple of years. And he said, but what I would give just for 5 more minutes with Nigel. And, and even he had kind of shared that, he always kind of felt that he was under Nigel's shadow, And he actually moved to England for 7 years, where they actually were apart and not a couple for 7 years, which I never knew.
No, I didn't know you
Because
did.
what he needed, because he just needed time to bloom himself, where he didn't feel he was Nigel's shadow. So he was always very supportive of Ray and I, and always the first to reach out. When we would separate, and it was. And like I said, Ray and I are very good friends today. We balanced each other out, but we also brought the worst out in each other. So it was a challenge. I think we get along better now, not being together.
That tends to happen. So
Yeah.
okay, so what happened after that? Where did you go? What direction? When did you start judging? Must have been getting close at that point.
But in 2008, I showed the last dog that I really kind of focused on. My biggest goal was I really wanted to go #1 non-sporting with a miniature poodle. No one had done it since Pack Trot
Trip.
Trip in the 60s. So like Orsino was one of the very last minis to ever kind of be in the top 10, have that type of, so it was an ambition for me. So I got this miniature bitch that I went #1 non-sporting with. She'd gone winner's bitch under Maxine Beam at PCA. I picked her up at the regional in California, and fortunately and unfortunately, she did it in a year. So she was meant to be a 2-year dog, but I'm also a very big believer. If you can't do better than you did the year, you don't go again. So if you can't beat what you've done, and I wasn't going to take a chance. She went I think I only showed her 67 times, which, as you know, back then that's low. Everyone else was 130 and 140. I showed her 67 times. She went #1 non-sporting, number 10 of all breeds. And when that happened, I retired. So Ray and I ended up separating in 2010. And at that point, we actually both relocated back to Vancouver, because that's where I'm born and raised. Ray is still there, and I'm back in Calgary. I joined I'm a hairstylist by profession. So, and I had hair salons, and I owned a couple hair salons. I was a stylist. And when I moved to Vancouver, I actually ended up going into the corporate side of things. And I became a business consultant for a color company owned by a Japanese conglomerate called Goldwell. I was there for 7 years, and then I was headhunted by L'Oreal to move to Alberta to take over business development for the prairies. So that's what I have been doing for the last 10 years. And I'm grateful that I do it well. So, and one thing that we didn't discuss, and I think when I'm thinking now in my head, because I think it was such a key part of my journey in this sport, is a lot of people wouldn't know that I actually owned and published Terrier Type from 2007 to 2011. And then I kind of passed the torch to Christy McDonald. And then Ray, Yvonne, and I actually started Canadian Dog Digest. And when we all sat around the table, and this is so funny because when we started writing that magazine, the comments that were coming from people that were sending notes, like Desi and Dorothy Welsh, and I can remember Dick Beauchamp sending a letter saying that he had never seen a publication that replicated Kennel Review as much as that particular magazine. And what he didn't know is that we literally went through Kennel Reviews and stole the font. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I wanted Kennel Review. I can remember working for Mark and Sally George, and I would sit in the library, and I would read, like, the handler, the annual handler section one was my favorite. And
Mine too.
well, no, and I would just lay on the floor and I could read them for hours and hours. And when you were seeing back then, people like Houston and Toddy and George and Marianne, and so many, these sections to me were just so amazing. So when I thought of a magazine for Canada, I wanted to recreate something that was so close to my heart, that was more about successful breeders and kind of like the evolution of the whole process. And I really, again, I think just Ray and I separated. We moved to Vancouver. Yvonne moved to Thunder Bay. Life got in the way. Multiple divorces got in the way, and it kind of all fell apart. But I have to say, for me, and I'm sure you're no different, I'm still a very tactile person. I know I can go through dog news online. I hate it.
Me
I
too.
would rather have a magazine. Um, and I fear for the future of our sport because there are so many resources that are no longer there, because now this generation realizes on instant gratification. And for me, like Poodles in America was a green book that had the pedigree of every single poodle that finished within a 4-year period. And to me, I to this day will still go back into those green books, and they haven't been around for probably, I want to say 2007 was the last volume. And there's just such an absence in information, because it's like, to me, as a breeder or even a handler, how do you know what pieces that you need to put together to create something? And a lot of people don't have the ability, like they just don't have we don't have the depth of quality that we used to have, especially like in my own variety, which is miniature poodles. And how do you create a vision of a breed when the breed isn't where it needs to be? So how do you create building blocks for a future if you can't create, fill in the gaps? And I think that those pedigree books, you could follow people's footprints and the steps that they took to kind of create something, and to create their own look.
Yeah, their own families. Yeah, we were discussing that yesterday. I do a podcast with Wayne Kavanaugh. We were talking about dog families, and I related to actually poodle families because Len Harfield used to always talk about different families. So that's how I see them in my head, as different families of dogs. And it's
And it's
important.
and it's very true. And it's I remember I said to someone one time, and I was talking about Buddy with the Dassin dogs, and I said, I don't have to agree with Buddy's vision of the breed,
Right.
but it clearly was, when you looked in a ring, there was no question that it was Dassin.
Well,
You know,
exactly.
they had a hallmark. They had, these stunningly beautiful faces. They had fantastic hair, just like Becky Mason with Beltor, the Eaton dogs. They all had a very unique look. And I used to really kind of use English breeding practices for my like vision, as far as you line breed for 5 generations, and then you find that other family of dogs that bring in the qualities that you don't have, that are also line bred. But we don't have those family of dogs anymore, and it's extremely challenging, because again, how do we create a future if we don't have the building blocks?
Yeah, the blueprints from the past, really. So yeah, I understand that. That is a problem. I never thought of it that way, Sean. That's good point.
It's just it's just uh, uh, it's interesting, because we have all of these wonderful conversations, and especially now when I'm on a panel, and you have these different conversations about different aspects that we're confronted with in our sport. And I can remember being on a panel a couple of years ago with Bill Shelton, and he had basically relocated from his home in California to Missouri, because the state rules for breeding animals in California are probably the worst they are in the country. So he was confronted with so many obstacles that he couldn't breed comfortably. So he relocated so he can continue to, make his contribution. And I really think, he's a perfect example in the modern day of a family of dogs.
No question.
And he keeps, and every year we see more dogs from that family. And again, we don't have to agree with anyone's vision, but he has created a look that is very identifiable. And I think we're running into the same problems now. We have these, metropolitan cities that have pushed us so far out, that breeding dogs, God, I was, as very close with Mary Ellen Fischler, and when she was on the board for PCA, she was terrified to breed a litter because if there were any repercussions. And you want to know something? When you breed anything living, there are always repercussions.
Yeah, it's natural.
So, and I have always been a firm believer, and Danny and I have had this conversation. When something leaves your house, even if it's the second coming of Christ, you have to be able to part with it for the rest of its life. Because once it's out of your care, there's just no guarantees. So it's a different, that's whenever I'm breeding dogs or everything, if it's leaving my house, it's like, am I prepared to say goodbye forever?
Hard one. Yep. Okay. So we've talked about a few of your mentors. Is there anybody else you want to talk about?
Anyone else? I don't. In what regard? I mean, there are so many people. Like, I mean, I think I'm very fortunate because I think, I had people like Dana Plunke, Timmy Brazier, Mark Shanoff, even having friendships with people like Marippy, who terriers have always been very close to my heart, and I'm extremely good friends with Darrell Heck. And I think when you have other successful people in your circle, they kind of inspire you to do better. And it's like I think there are some people that are just so extremely capable. I think you could give them rat terriers and they could make them best in show winners, and that truly is a gift. And I think people like James Dalton and Marippy, and they no matter what breeds they get in, they just can, what is it Nigel used to say, turn a sow's tooth or sow's ear into a silk purse.
Yes.
and it's very true. And and I admire and I respect more than anything, the most attractive quality to me about any human is God-given talent. I don't care if it's trimming a dog. I don't care if it's painting, if it's playing the piano. I don't find there to be a better or sexier quality than passion and commitment to doing something well.
Yeah.
So, and like I said, I think I've been very blessed. It's I had a conversation a couple of years ago, and I think I shared this with you. Eddie Zook and I were at the Michigan sporting seminars, and I had made a comment about I wish I had lived 20 years earlier. And it made me change. His remark to my comment made me change the way I think of things and be grateful and kind of live in a place of no regret. Because you want to know, our lives, they're kind of, I think they're preordained before we start. But if we knew the whole book ahead of time, it would be too overwhelming. So we get to see it page by page. And, I said, I really wish I had come into this sport 20 years earlier. And his response to me was, no, I'm happy when I came in. He says, because I wouldn't have the memory and met the people that I've met today. And I wouldn't give up any of those relationships for anything in the world if I had come in 20 years earlier. And I really think that was, probably one of the more defining moments. And again, the people that have shaped me, who I have become. I was a little boy from Pitt Meadows who did not come from a background in dogs. You know, we weren't even allowed to own a dog. So my mom was not an animal person. I've been in this sport for 39 years. And I really, you know, all of the people, you, Alice, and Mark, Timmy, have all kind of shaped and helped me to evolve to become who I am today.
I like your book analogy, and I just wish I could get the Coles note so I could catch up on things sometimes.
There's a couple chapters I would like to rewrite, but
or at least edit, right?
Exactly.
So you started judging when?
In 2012.
2012. Tell me how that process came about.
I just, for me, thought it was a very natural evolution.
Yes.
You know, I started, you know, cleaning out poopy runs. I became an assistant. I became a handler. I was a breeder, and I kind of felt that was, for me, was the natural process.
Yeah, no question.
And you want to know, so many people criticize the process. I can assure you, the process that we have in Canada is probably one of the fairest processes, and perhaps a little too quick. And I see a lot of, I was part of a group, and I actually stopped following the group because I was really kind of overwhelmed by the negativity. Our system is faster than almost, unless you're very, very, very wealthy and you're in the FCI and can be granted a license quickly, our system is probably one of the fastest systems on the globe. The drawbacks with our system is we move forward. We move forward fairly quickly with many of the groups that we judge never having the opportunity to see any of these breeds.
Or at least enough of them, yeah.
Well, and we're not even going to talk about size of entries, but there are just a handful of breeds that we just don't ever see. Mm-hmm. And I think, you know, as a Canadian judge, we're always extremely anxious. You know, we want to be invited to judge to the US, and we want to be judged to judge abroad. And one of the biggest lessons that I've learned, and I very rarely ever refuse a judging assignment. And let me tell you, the first 6 years that you're a judge, it's very expensive. Because, you know, when you're doing your provisionals and your permits, you don't get paid, and you don't even get your expenses compensated. Plus, you're having to, you know, endure the cost of ongoing education. And I have always tried to really resource really good education. Like, I've always gone to the seminars they have in Washington State. You know, I went to Michigan because I heard that was the best sporting education. There was someone presenting a couple of breeds in Ontario, and I flew to Toronto. So I've really spared no expense when it comes to my education and learning the breeds. Because I think if we're honest with ourselves, we judge a handful of breeds really well. And we do our damn best at the rest. But you need, as a Canadian, because our shows are small, and a lot of times, not that we don't have good dogs, but a lot of time we become glorified ribbon dispensers. You know, it can be very overwhelming when you walk into a class of, you know, 20 specials. Mm. Because, you know, and how about a breed? You know, you walk in, one of my first times I was in the US, I walked into an entry of like 50 bulldogs. Well, you want to know, I've seen bulldogs. We don't have them to that depth in our country. In the US, bulldogs and Frenchies are fairly large. I literally looked at everything, you know, that Anne Eyre has written, you know, the illustrated standards, and really reviewed. And I can remember a girl saying one night, Patty Keenan, David Fry, and I did I don't know what it was called, but basically it was questions. We were a panel. The three of us were a panel. Questions were asked of us. And one woman got up and made a claim that how nice it was for judges that we leave the dog show at 5 o'clock at night. We go for dinner with all the other judges. We have no care in the world. And we go back the next morning and we judge dogs. And I said to the lady, I said, can I ask you, what were you doing last night at 10 o'clock? And she said, well, I was in bed. And I said, really? I said, well, how lucky for you. I said, I judged until 8:30. I said, and then at 10 o'clock at night, I was laying in my bed and I was going through all of the breed standards because the first breed that I had at 8:30 in the morning were 42 Havanese. And I said, so I need to refresh my memory on all of the nuances of Havanese. I said, so if you think that most of us, if we've gone into judging, we take the guardianship of your breed seriously. And it's always an ongoing education. I, again, going back to the start of this conversation, I think as a Canadian, we can go into the US into very overwhelming situations. And it's just really learning how to sort because we don't have that. So I think that when you're getting in to become a judge, accept every single assignment that you can. Even if it's with one of those, I used to do a lot of the IBACA shows, the European style ones that was set up in the West. And I asked Ginny when I accepted my first one, I said, should I do this? And she said, you want to know any experience is great experience.
I agree. Yes.
And you want to know one of the things I became very popular with that organization because my critiques were long, where a lot of people's critiques were eyes, oval, front, good, and I would actually go in and like I said, they asked me so often, I was going every single month. Sometimes I was going 2 or 3 times a month, but my ability to write critiques became second nature. And I really think that is a great opportunity. And even when we're judging today and we're judging small entries, try to run a critique through your head. You don't have, we can't do it verbally, but I can remember, people coming from like Norway or Sweden, and they do more oral critiques, and they'll do them here as well. And I remember there was a very famous judge that came to Alberta Kennel Club one year who replaced Hans Lettinen, and she was this older woman and funnier than hell. And she's going over oh, nice eye, oh, good teeth, oh, bad front. But I think you need to do that process. We can't talk about it out loud, but when you're examining dogs, try to run the critique through your head.
That makes sense. You remember Bob Cole or the Judge
Oh,
Robert Cole?
absolutely.
He was the same way. He would go over a dog and he would describe it to himself as he's going over the dog. His illustrations were wonderful, and I'm sure that's how he saw them. But I really enjoyed listening to him as he was going over certain dogs. Didn't always.
It was like Melbourne Downing and his like dot system or whatever. You just have to find, again, I think, it's very easy when you get into a big class. And I always sort my classes, especially once they're over a certain size. I sort them as I go. And I've become fairly in the US known. When I first went down, they thought I was a madman because I can remember I judged a really big entry in Chinese crested, and all my discards are normally at the head of. I shouldn't give my secrets away, but all my discards are always at the head of the line. And I can remember as they're getting more and more, and I can remember 2 professional handlers looking at each other and like, oh my God, he's crazy. and I sent my discard pile around and I thanked them for entering. And I looked at the 2 handlers because now they were at the head of the line, and I said, and the 2 of you should be ashamed of yourself.
Well, that's true. And I remember how Mrs. Clark used to work from the middle out. It used to freak some people right out, especially at nationals, right?
And to be honest with you, that's the way I do it. I did the Min Pin specialty in New York, and the only 2 people that figured out what I was doing were Betty Ann Stenmark and Ginny. And I remember Bob Whitney sitting in the corner. What the hell? He's lost his mind.
Well, I remember flying to the Beagle National years ago with Mr. and Mrs. Gear, and Mrs. Clark was doing it, and she ended up with my dog in the center. Well, Mrs. Gear we flew all the way here to go 18th, So it's
And for me, if I'm judging, if you're somewhere in the middle, you're in a safe place.
Yeah.
But again, I remember judging a specialty at the day before the garden in Luke Ballou going, honey, how do you do them backwards? I can't even get it right when I go the regular way.
He's amazing. I love him. I always liked Maxine too, because Maxine would, well, in my breeds anyways, she'd do pairs. She'd set up these pairs throughout the ring, and I caught on eventually. And if I was in the first couple section of pairs, I was happy, but if I was at the back, I wasn't so happy. But I enjoyed, because she was, especially when she did my breed Irish setters, she picked two that they could be from the same family, and they didn't necessarily stay the same throughout the class, but I could follow her really easily. It was fun.
I think, I have been fortunate. I've been given a lot of really wonderful opportunities, to judge, around the world, and, at very wonderful assignments in the US. And I think as a judge, you don't have to agree with the way I see your breed, but you should at least have a sense of what I like.
Yeah.
And I can remember an IG woman. Palm Springs gets an entry of about 30 or so Italian greyhounds. And this woman came up to me and she says, I don't necessarily agree with what you like in an IG, but she says, if it's there, you put it up. And it was just, I'm very, and again, when you're doing a specialty, I maybe suffer a little bit from the people that influence me. When I judge a specialty, I think when I look across, my best of breed, best of winners, best of opposites, select dog and select bitch should look like a family of dogs. So, and sometimes you have to sometimes acknowledge two different looks. So your breed winner and your opposite may look one way, and your select dog and your select bitch, because you have two very distinct looks in your ring, and both need to be rewarded. But I really think that when we're judging, as long as people can get a sense of what we're looking for, they're happy.
So if you were to give advice to a aspiring judge, what would that advice be then?
Take your time. And I really, and I said this one time in a conversation with someone that I really respected. I said, if I'm judging Pekingese and Bill Taylor is sitting there watching me judge Pekingese, and he thinks, what the hell have you done? Come and have don't as a judge think that the moment that you put that badge on your chest that you're above conversation.
Right.
Because I think our differences that lead to conversations bring us to a higher level of understanding. And it's, I just can even remember it as being in certain situations. One of my first assignments, Mary Duke was coming to watch me judge IG. Her house dog's an IG. I was having a bit of a stroke. Brian Martin says to me, oh, Mary's going to come and watch you judge IG. And I'm like sweating bullets, because it's like, I haven't been to the US a lot. There's a big entry. Well, I get to the end. I have 7 specials, and I don't want to use any of them for the breed or opposite. Now, I'm not an IG person, so it's a fairly big statement to give your winner's dog the breed over 7 specials and your class bitch opposite over all the bitch specials. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh my God, she's going to slay me. But at the end of the day, if anyone knows me, whether I'm right, and I'm not always right, I have the courage of my convictions. So I bring out my winner's dog, I put it to the head of the line, I give it the breed, I put my class bitch best of opposite sex. And at the end, she comes over and she hugs me and she says, thank God for having the guts to do the right thing.
That reminds me of Nigel's story. Nigel was telling me a story about doing a national especially, and he ends up giving a class dog the breed over all the specials. And it was a big entry. And he said that the rep came up to him and said that it was nice to see someone have the courage to do that. And he said, "Madam, it's not courage, it's intelligence." So
That's Nigel. What did he used to say? Oh, honey, I will forget more in a day than you'll learn in a lifetime.
He was something else.
But you want to know is if you look at, and if you look in when you're reading history and everything, if you look at the contribution, that he made to the sport in a whole.
Yes.
And look at like the Griffs that he imported, the Welsh that he imported, like these different contributions that people aren't even aware that he made, in his time in the sport. They were remarkable. And I think, a lot of times he used to try to do things for shock value, but really, I mean, his ability, and it's one of the, when you talk about judges, I think anytime I've talked myself out of doing something, I've made a mistake.
Yeah.
So if you just go follow your gut and, don't get in your head, it's easier. You want to know, at the end of the day, the only person as a judge that we need to make happy is us. If I'm standing in the middle of the ring, I don't need to make you happy. I don't need to make this person happy. I have to live with myself, and I have to be happy with my choices.
Yeah, I agree. Trust your first instinct. I agree with that wholly. Like I haven't judged it like a lot, but I find myself, if I same idea, if I talk myself out of something, I'm usually wrong. I'm usually, when I go back and look at it, I think, oh geez, why did you do that?
Yeah. And it's easy. You want to know, because we get into situations, and you want to know, again, you have anxiety. You're in a situation, and it's like we're expected to do a certain thing, and again, no one's put those expectations on us except us. So it's like right now, I think through this whole COVID thing, if you're judging an entry of dogs, if you limit your choices to your breed winners and your group winners to specials, you're going to miss a lot of really good dogs.
Probably, yeah.
Well, no, we haven't had dog shows.
Exactly.
There you're going to have some diamonds in the rough in your classes, and you want to know something, you're going to have some. So just have the courage to see it through. If you're standing in a ring and your first, second, third, and fourth in the group are all class dogs, so be it. Chances are, if we had been in a regular situation, they would have been champions.
Right. All right. One more question, Shawn. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. If you could meet the 20-year-old Shawn Nichols now, is there any advice you'd give him about the book that's about to be written about him?
I probably would just well, through this whole thing, there's certainly life has not. There was a movie, and I liked this particular line, and then when I Googled the movie, because I was so impressed with it, it was actually rated one of the worst movies of that year. But there was a life lesson in that movie, and I honestly I feel that it kind of encompasses my whole 39 years in dogs. And that is basically, life will knock you down. You just have to have the courage to pick yourself up and go further. And I just think if I was going to go back to my 20-year-old self, I would be just like, stay the course. My life could have been very different if I made different choices. But when you're younger, the way you deal with your emotions, and the way when you're on the other side of the country and you're away from your mom, and you're dealing with the death of your mentor, and you're dealing with the emotions of being a young person, discovering love for the first time, it kind of can knock you off of your course. And I think, had I remained in the US, and that's why I say, if I was going to If I had stayed in the US and I had showed dogs, I think I would have had a very bright future. Um, but at 25, I just didn't have the ability to stay the course because I didn't feel that I had the support emotionally that I needed to pick myself up and keep going.
What movie was it? I'm curious now.
I don't even remember. And because I was embarrassed, I was telling someone this line and I was like, what was the name of the movie? And then I finally remembered what it was. And when I remember, I'll let you know.
Okay.
And it was like a movie about this Spanish kid or whatever that gets hit by a bus, and then how all of the story comes together of how we are all so closely connected, by 6 degrees of separation. So, and it was just, but the best part of the movie was that line.
What was that line? That's great. All right. Well, I appreciate your time, Shawn. It was great talking to you.
It was good talking to you. So,
I'm sure I'll see you somewhere.
hopefully sooner than later.
I'll give Daniel my best.
I shall. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Shawn. That was great. I knew we'd have a great time. It was good to catch up. If you like what we're doing here, make sure you press the like, share, and subscribe button. And if you want to get a hold of me at dogshowtips@gmail.com. Or if you just want to find out what's happening in Will's world, go to willalexander.net. And don't forget, all these interviews are available on podcasts, as well as the Dog Show Drive with myself and Wayne Kavanaugh. And those can be found on Spotify, Apple, and Sketcher. Dog Show Drive comes out every Thursday, and the interviews come out whenever Doc Journey puts them out. All right. See you next week, guys. Bye-bye.